So after finishing the Mycota, let's move on to the next group, which is the Ascomycota. So Ascomycota is a group that includes many soil fungi. So they are fungi present in the soil, so they can be everywhere. And one example we'll start with is the Aspergillus. So again, the spores of this Aspergillus can be in the soil, it can spread everywhere, and two products that they may contain levels of the aflatoxin. This toxin is toxin produced by the Aspergillus. That's why it has importance and medical relevance. So the aflatoxin of the Aspergillus can be found in the canned corn, and it can be found also in the peanut butter. So those two preparations may have traces of the aflatoxin. And why do we need to check the products for that? Because aflatoxins are carcinogenic, so they can cause cancer. Okay, so another example of a member of the Ascomycota is the Penicillium. So as you can see from the name, this is linked to the production of penicillin, the antibiotic, and it can grow in a variety of nutrients because it is present in the soil, and it uses this production of penicillin as a defense in order to inhibit many of the other bacteria that can be present in the soil, so in order to maintain the nutrients for the growth of the fungi. So here in this picture you can see the effect of the penicillium. So penicillium shown here at this circle, white circle, you can see an inhibition zone around it. So we call this clear area an inhibition zone, and this streaks or zigzag growth is representing one of the bacterium, which is Staphylococcus. So Staphylococcus was not able to grow very close to the growing penicillium due to the fact that it was inhibited by the effect of penicillin, and that is the historical story behind the discovery of penicillin and how it can lead to the inhibition of growth of many bacterial strains. Another example of the Ascomycota, and here again we are showing how it can cause a human disease. Remember, in the first slide we have discussed the fact that some strains of Aspergillus, they produce toxins. One example of these toxins is the aflatoxin, which is carcinogenic, and it can be present in the peanut butter or the canned corn. Another example of an Ascomycota that can lead to human disease is the Stachybotrys. So Stachybotrys is the mold that is causing the black mold, and it is actually a type of fungi that loves to grow on cellulose. And one example of products which will be rich in cellulose is the paper. So that is a component of the drywall covering our walls at home and offices and so on. So what is a drywall? A drywall is the walls that is made of gypsum. This gypsum is covered by papers, and usually it is there is a layer of paint on top of that. However, all of that does not stop the spores of Stachybotrys, especially if humidity is there, because that's one of the things that fungi loves to grow. So if there are high levels of humidity and you get the spores of Stachybotrys, they will grow on top of the paints of the drywall, unless it is an antifungal paint. And there are examples in the market that products of paints that are antifungal in nature. But if you are not using one of these you are using just normal paint, Stachybotrys spores will start from an area like that, characteristic with this black mold, and they will spread because they will feed on the cellulose from the paper, which is a component of this drywall. So what is the human disease? This can lead to so the inhalation of these spores, they will grow in your lungs, producing the toxins, and these toxins produce serious illness. That's why please keep an eye on your walls to check for these black mold areas and try to stop them once they appear. The last group is the Basidiomycota, and as can be shown here in this image, they include the mushroom. So they include the mushrooms, the puffballs, which is the image here, and the shelf fungi. They can be plant parasites or mutualists and decomposers. And one characteristic thing about this group, we call them the Basidiomycota because the members of this group produces structures called basidium, where the spores will form. So a basidium, it's a club-like structure where the spores will form inside, and usually members of this Basidiomycota, they form association with other photosynthetic organisms like algae and cyanobacteria, and this association is known as lichens. So you usually see the lichens on the surface of rocks in parks, and they have different colors as we will discuss in the next slides. So as we said, mushrooms, they belong to the group of Basidiomycota, and what you need to know is that the mushroom is the reproductive organ in this group of fungi. So as shown here in this image, underneath the cap of the mushroom we have what is known as gills. So inside each of these gills we have the basidium. Remember, this is the club-like structure that carries the spores, or that forms the spores. So the spores will be formed within the basidium. That's why they are called basidiospores. And then they will be spread from the cap to be dispersed to give rise to new mushrooms and so on. So if you take the cap of the mushroom and you tap it on a piece of paper, usually of a like dark color in order to make the contrast, you get an imprint of the spores. So what you can see here is the imprint of the spores which are present within the gills of the mushroom. This image highlights again the same principle, that the gills contain the basidium. So basidium is that club-like structure that have the spores, that form the spores, and all of that are present here in the gills, which is under the cap of the mushroom. The last slide, we are going to finish with the part of this video about fungi, is the lichens. So as we said, members of the Basidiomycota, they usually form association with a mutualistic relationship with photosynthetic symbiont, and this photosynthetic symbiont is usually the algae or the cyanobacteria. So as you can see here, there is an intermixing between the algal cell and the hyphae of the fungi. So what types of benefit being exchanged here? So the hyphae of the fungi is producing or is uptaking the nutrients from the surrounding media and providing these nutrients to the algae or the cyanobacteria, while the algae or cyanobacteria is giving fixed carbon. Why? Because they are autotrophs, algae and cyanobacteria can produce their own carbon compounds, so they exchange it and give it to the fungi in return of different nutrients being absorbed from the hyphae of the fungi and being given to the photosynthetic symbiont. So this relationship, which is known as lichens, it can be seen as different color, very colorful and very beautiful structures, usually on the surface of rocks, and I'm sure many of you have seen that on the trunks of trees or rocks in the different parks. Thank you so much. That has brought us to the end of the video where we discussed the fungi. Thank you so much, and wishing you all the best.